was a chilly autumn night when I first met him. I was walking home after a late shift at the diner, hurrying down the poorly lit side streets to get back to my apartment. The neighborhood wasn't the best, but it beat the tiny studio I could barely afford downtown. I pull my coat tighter and pick up my pace as the street lamps above me flickered. That's when I first noticed him behind me, a tall figure in a long black coat, face obscured by the shadows. He moved silently, steadily closing the distance between us. I quickened my steps, but so did he. My heart pounded as I considered the possibility I was being followed. I took a sharp turn down an alley, hoping to lose him. But when I glanced back over my shoulder, he was still there, unrelenting. I broke into a panicked run, my breaths coming out in short, choked gasps. The exit to the alley loomed ahead, and I put myself harder, not daring to look back. I emerged onto the next street, temporarily flooded with relief. But it was short-lived. I caught a glimpse of the dark figure rounding the corner, still trailing me. I sprinted across the road toward my building, fumbling for my keys with trembling hands. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to unlock the front door and slip inside to safety. I told myself it was just a freak occurrence. This was a big city after all, but I couldn't shake the ominous feeling that had settled over me. Over the next few weeks, I thought I saw him everywhere, always lurking in the background, partially obscured by crowds or shadows. No one else seemed to notice him. I becoming increasingly paranoid, taking circuitous routes home from work each night. But it didn't matter. He was always right behind me. One night, I finally had enough. I whipped around and confronted the stalking figure. "What do you want from me?" I demanded. He said nothing. Just stood there motionless. I took in his pale skin, jet black hair, and dark hollow eyes. Every instinct told me to run, but I stood my ground. "Leave me alone," I shouted. That's when I saw his mouth twist into a sinister grin. He took a step toward me and I turned and fled, running as if my life depended on it. I didn't dare look back until I was safely locked inside my apartment once again. I hoped that was the end of it, but I was wrong. A few nights later, I was leaving work, the parking lot deserted. As I fumbled to unlock my car door, a hand grabbed my shoulder. I spun around with a shriek to find him looming over me. Up close, his features were grotesque, almost inhuman. He flashed that chilling grin again as he backed me up against the car. I cowered in terror, convinced these were my final moments. But just then, headlights appeared as another car turned into the lot. My stalker shot me a glare before melting back into the shadows. The next day, I went to the police. They listened with concern, but could do nothing without evidence of an actual crime. I wondered if I was losing my mind. My few family members, I told, wrote it off as female paranoia. But I knew this was real, and I decided if the police couldn't protect me, I'd have to protect myself. I started taking kickboxing classes at the local gym, practicing my punches and kicks every night. I brought pepper spray everywhere I went. I even bought a stun gun online. I was always alert, always ready for him to appear. One night, as I was walking to my car after class, there he was, waiting for me. My hand tightened around the stun gun in my pocket. As he lunged toward me, I thrust it into his chest and pulled the trigger. Electricity coursed through him, and he seized up, then hit the ground with a heavy thud. I stood over him, shaking. For the first time, I felt powerful instead of terrified. As I looked down at his unconscious body, I knew he wasn't just some random creep. He was a real monster who had fixated on me for reasons I didn't understand. I considered calling the police again, but I knew they still wouldn't comprehend the gravity of the threat. I dragged him to my truck and drove him far outside the city limits. In the woods, I dug a shallow grave and rolled him into it. As I buried him alive, I thought I heard him sputtering faintly beneath the dirt, but I didn't care. I patted down the last shovelful of earth and left him there to rot. These days I feel free again, no longer haunted by those cold, menacing eyes around every corner. Sometimes I wonder if he's still down there, struggling for breath in his makeshift coffin, waiting to come back and torment me once more. But that's a worry for another time. For now, I'm just glad I can finally walk alone at night without being afraid of the shadows. It was a chilly Saturday night in November when I decided to stop by the grocery store on my way home from work. Being a single woman living alone, I'm always extra cautious when I'm out and about at night. As I walk through the mostly empty parking lot to my car, I notice a beat-up old van parked a few spots down from me. It didn't look familiar, so I made a mental note to keep an eye on it as I loaded my groceries into my back seat. Just as I closed my truck, I heard footsteps approaching behind me. My pulse quickened as I fumbled to get my keys out. As soon as I turned around, I came face to face with a disheveled-looking man who appeared to be in his 40s. "Hey there," he said with an unsettling grin. "Need some help with those bags?" "No thanks, I'm all set," I reply, trying to sound confident despite the uneasiness stirring inside me. I hurried over to the driver's side door, hoping he would take the hint and leave me alone, but he followed close behind. "You sure you don't need a hand? Wouldn't want you to strain yourself lifting all that," he said. Something about his tone made my skin crawl. "I'm fine, thanks," I said, more firmly this time. But still, he persisted. "Come on, sweetheart. I just want to help you out," he said, reaching out towards my grocery bags. I recoiled back just in time to avoid his grasp. My mind was racing. I needed to get out of there. As I fumbled to unlock my car door, the man suddenly lunged forward and grabbed my arm forcefully. "Let go of me," I shouted, trying to wrench my arm free. His grip only tightened as a sinister smile spread across his face. I felt my adrenaline spike. With all my strength, I shoved him back hard and managed to break free from his hold. Wasting no time, I jumped into my car, slammed the door shut, and hit the lock button. My heart was pounding against my chest as I frantically tried to get my key into the ignition. Just then, the man appeared right outside my window, banging his hands loudly against the glass. "Let me in," he yelled angrily. I let out a shriek, terrified by the deranged look in his eyes. The key finally turned in the ignition. I slammed the car into reverse, just as the man tried to open the passenger door. I sped backwards out of the parking spot, almost hitting an oncoming car in my panic. Tires squealing, I peeled out of the parking lot and drove towards the main road. As I merged onto the street, I watched in my rearview mirror as the man ran back to the old, beat-up van and got in. To my horror, he started following me. I took random turns down side streets, desperately trying to lose him, but he continued to trail close behind me. After what felt like an eternity of winding through neighborhoods, I finally managed to turn down a road where I lost sight of those glowing headlights in my mirror. My whole body shaking, I pulled into the parking garage of my apartment complex and broke down into sobs. I don't think I'll ever be able to go grocery shopping again without looking over my shoulder. That man's chilling voice and deranged eyes will haunt me forever. It was a cold, dreary Saturday evening in November when I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. Work had been stressful lately, and I just needed some fresh air and alone time. I should have known better than to go out so late, but my neighborhood is usually very safe and quiet. As I strolled down the dimly lit sidewalk, I couldn't shake this uneasy feeling that someone was watching me. I glanced over my shoulder a few times, but didn't see anything suspicious. Still, I couldn't ignore the prickly sensation on the back of my neck, like unseen eyes tracking my every move. I picked up my pace, hoping to get home sooner rather than later. The streetlights overhead cast an eerie glow on the empty street. I didn't see a single other person out walking, which was odd for a weekend. I started regretting my decision to come outside as the shadows seemed to creep in closer. Just then, I heard footsteps echoing behind me. My breath caught in my throat when I turned and spotted a tall, lanky man in a long black coat following about 20 feet back. Something about his stiff posture and slow, deliberate gait instantly set me on edge. I averted my gaze and focused on getting home, listening intently to see if his footsteps continued to tail me. Sure enough, a few moments later I could hear the click of his shoes on the concrete growing nearer. I was still at least 2 blocks from my house, and there was no one else around I could call out to for help. My mind started racing, wondering if I could make a run for it, or if that would spur him into attacking me. As the man closed the distance between us, I noticed from the corner of my eye that his face was obscured by the hood of his coat. All I could see was a pale chin speckled with stubble. I increased my pace as much as I could without breaking into a sprint. The hairs on my arms prickled when I realized his footsteps matched my speed exactly. It was like he was purposefully staying right behind me, herding me along towards some unknown destination. In a moment of desperation, I decided to cross to the other side of the street, hoping it would shake him. My shoes slapped loudly on the asphalt as I hurried across, not checking for cars in my haste. When I reached the opposite sidewalk, I risked a glance behind me. My throat constricted when I saw the hooded man was crossing as well. His head bowed at an odd angle as he steadily pursued me. By now, my heart felt like it would beat right out of my chest. I abandoned all pretense and broke into a run, sprinting as fast as my legs could carry me to get away from this bizarre and frightening individual. I nearly twisted my ankle as I raced around a corner, not daring to look back and see how close he was. The freezing air burned my lungs as I gulped down panicked breaths. Suddenly, I collided with something solid and nearly bounced backwards onto the ground. I cried out in alarm, bracing myself for an attack. But when I lifted my gaze, I realized I had just crashed into a gruff, heavy-set man walking his dog on the sidewalk. My eyes darted around frantically, but the hooded stalker was nowhere in sight. The man gave me a strange look and asked if I was okay. I rambled some excuse about exercising and thanked him breathlessly before continuing my mad dash towards home. The remaining block felt like an eternity until I finally reached the front steps of my building. I scrambled up them as fast as I could, slamming the door behind me and locking it securely for good measure. I collapsed against the hallway wall, shaking with adrenaline and gasping to catch my breath. I could hardly believe what just happened. Who was that twisted individual that seemed intent on hunting me through the shadows? And how had he vanished so suddenly when I hit that man walking his dog? It was like he had melted back into the night as seamlessly as he had appeared. After that horrific experience, I vowed never to walk alone at night again. Even in the comforting light of day, I can't help glancing over my shoulder whenever I'm outside, half expecting to see that ominous hooded figure lurking in the periphery. I worry one day he'll reappear to finish whatever twisted game he had planned for me. But until then, I take solace in the safety of my home, keeping the lights burning brightly to ward off the sinister darkness and the strangers that dwell within it. I've always considered myself a friendly person, the kind of guy who will chat with strangers in line at the grocery store or smile at fellow walkers when I'm out taking my dog for a stroll. But after the events of last month, I don't know if I'll ever look at strangers the same way again. It started with just a typical run to the corner store. I needed to grab a few things for dinner that night, so I put on my shoes, grabbed my wallet, and headed out the door. It was late afternoon and still light out. I figured I'd be in and out of the store in 10 minutes tops. As I walked down the sidewalk, I noticed a man up ahead heading my way. He was older, with scraggly gray hair and worn-out clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. He was mumbling to himself and gesturing emphatically with his hands. As he got closer, I felt a twinge of apprehension, so I gave him a wide berth, crossing to the other side of the street. Once inside the store, I grabbed a handbasket and went down the aisles collecting items as quickly as I could. The man's image still lingered in my mind, and I found myself glancing repeatedly out the windows to the street. As I stood in line at the register, I looked outside again and felt my heart nearly stop. There he was, standing on the sidewalk right in front of the store entrance. He was facing the door, still mumbling and flailing his hands. My palms started to sweat, and my mouth went dry. I considered staying in the store until he left, but who knew how long that might take? Mustering my courage, I paid for my items and headed cautiously outside. The man spotted me immediately, and his eyes locked onto mine. "You!" he shouted. "You need to listen!" He started shambling toward me, arms outstretched. I backed away quickly, nearly stumbling over the curb, with my groceries tucked under one arm. I turned and rushed across the street, not bothering to check for cars. I looked back once I reached the other side, my breath coming in gasps. The man had stopped following me, but he continued to stare after me with a strange smile on his face. Over the next week, I started noticing the man around my neighborhood. He would turn up on street corners as I passed by or be lurking near the entrance to my apartment building. His presence filled me with dread, but he hadn't approached me since that day at the store. Late one night, I took my dog out for a quick walk before bed. It was foggy and dimly lit outside, but she really needed to go. As we hurried down the sidewalk, the hairs on my neck stood up. I could sense someone behind us. My dog's pace quickened as she gave a low growl. I turned and saw the familiar figure shambling out of the fog. He matched my speed, following about 10 feet back and continuing to mumble incoherently. I considered turning to confront him, but thought better of it. Gripping my dog's leash tightly, I broke into a run back toward my apartment. I could hear his footsteps getting faster behind me. Just as I reached the steps of my building, he shouted, "You can't ignore me." I rushed inside and locked the door, peering out the window with trembling hands. He stared up at me for a minute before turning and disappearing into the night. The police have been patrolling my block more often, but there's not much they can do unless he actually threatens me. I take a different route to work now and constantly look over my shoulder wherever I go. I know he's still out there somewhere, waiting for his next chance to get my attention. I used to smile at strangers, but now I walk with my head down, avoiding eye contact. A part of me wonders if I'll ever feel safe again.